Hello. How you doing, Joe? How has your week been treating you? Hey, Jay, how you doing?
Good, yourself, Mitch.
Doing well, thank you. Happy Monday afternoon.
You too. I'll get my video live here in a little bit. I'm just working on some sensitive stuff, and you can see my screen.
Not a problem. Hey, you can keep it on or keep it off at your will and pleasure. So
Perfect.
good to see you, Joe.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. How are you doing?
Doing well. Doing well. How are you holding together?
No, not bad. That's why we're here, right?
Exactly. Because we're all still standing.
Just about, yeah. We've had a cold, kind of self-isolated last week. Maureen's been sick since Christmas,
Oh,
like bronchitis and problems with her chest and that sort of thing. So, but she's okay. We're working from home. We've got a couple of things going on that's keeping us afloat, but we'll have to see, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Trying to keep positive one day at a time. I'm going to have to keep coming off of here. I'm still listening, but my dog is being annoying and wants to go out. So we just deal with that.
Not a problem.
So how many people have you got joining?
We've got 15 to 20. So
Yeah.
it being what it normally is, we'll probably have in the 8 to 10 range. And they should be popping in here very, very shortly. And then we'll make sure to be respectful of everybody's time and get everything moving.
Yeah.
So what's going on, Joe? Fill me in. What's been happening with you for the last couple of months?
Well, we started the year off really, really well in terms of lots of inquiries, and we thought, wow, this is really going to turn around this year from last year, right, being our worst, right? And we've just had one after the other just not go through. So we've just got a couple of big ones going on, which, as I said, is keeping us afloat. But it's not, we're in the same boat as everybody, right? That's the thing. We're no different than anybody else. It's scary, but you just got to just keep putting one foot in front of the other, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. What's the alternative? The alternative is to surrender, give up, walk away.
Yeah.
And if all of us do that at the same time, nothing works and it gets even worse than before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Hey, Lynn.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just so ready for this stuff to be done.
I hear you.
we can be face to face.
Matthew, how's it going, brother?
Hey, how you doing, Mitch?
Doing well, doing well. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yep, good to see you. So we're probably, our official registrations is going to put another 10 in this room for sure. We've got, again, probably about 15. You know how real life works. There's going to be 8 to 10 people. So we'll give it another 2 to 3 minutes. People will be jumping in. I'm assuming Ilya's still popping in and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, he's supposed to be. There's supposed to be one other who's joining us from his group as well.
Yeah, I saw that the registration's coming up today. So we'll get through it. I've got some resources for you guys to take away. And again, while we're still waiting for people to hop in, if you obviously registered through Eventbrite, you should have seen a link to download the business continuity planning session. If it's not there, I've dropped the actual Drive folder link to download it right here in the chat. So go ahead and grab that. This is what you're going to want to take away after. Hey, Jay, how's it going? Good. We're getting close. So anyway, if everybody has not got the document ahead of time, you can just hit the Drive folder link there right in the chat window at the bottom. You'll be able to download it. You're going to want this today to make the most use of our 2 hours together. I'm going to be walking through and explaining first what a business continuity plan is, how it works, the way we're going to build it, the framework and the format of the document that you've got is a shorter version. Some of these documents can be exhaustive in their size. In fact, they can be dozens and dozens of pages. This one is much tighter, much simpler. It's going to help you to plan more effectively for what's coming next. And then, of course, to build it out or to make it quite a bit broader will be up to you. And, of course, there are resources. There will be resources online. I'm available as well, simply because, well, guess what? We're all in this together. And if the least I can do is help anybody that I know or people that have been, fortunately introduced to me giving this session today, then my ability to help you will increase quite a bit. So the document, again, is about 10 pages plus a really colorful cover. We're going to work through it from start to finish. And then about the last 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to put my official coaching hat on. And for those people that are joining that may not know, I am, of course, a coach and a business coach, and I will be looking to help just understand a little more what's going on, maybe give you a little bit more breathing space inside your own head, inside your own mind with what's happened the last little bit. And then together, I want you to consider that whatever resources I've accumulated in this room today and other outside there, it's our job to share them amongst each other. Is that a fair place for us to start?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right, we're sitting at 2:02. We're getting a few more people jumping in, but I'm going to get started to respect everybody's time here, and people are going to have to catch up. So now, in favor of that, I will go to this. I will go to there, and I will share. All right, who's seen this bad boy, either through the link or just through the link inside their chat right now? Business continuity plan.
Yeah.
This is the biggest reason why.
Yep.
Awesome. This is the biggest reason why we're all here today. Why? We're all involved in businesses, running businesses, or just trying to make sense of what's going on. We are either as close to being self-employed or fully self-employed. And that means that we are subject to the same economic conditions as any business, large or small. So we either work for ourselves, we're working in small teams, or else we're looking to build what we've got. And so business continuity is something that most people would consider outside of pandemic level events like what we're going through right now to be a medium, large, or capital or enterprise class of business exercise. Now, I know we've got some IT on the call here, and Jay may dispute that, but technically that's where some of his background comes in a little more when it comes to contingency planning. In the marketplace we are in right now, we are all subject to the same rules of engagement, which means we're all losing revenue, we're all losing clients and customers, and we're all suffering what in some respects could be a catastrophic event for our business. Now, catastrophic, most of the time when I talk, is not a word necessarily designed because it means something terrible. It means something volatile or something significant changes very quickly. In this instance, we've had COVID-19 move into the marketplace, and that means that we have to, in the midst of dealing with it, first week, first days, first hours, attempt to plan and effectively protect our business, protect our environment, and protect our livelihoods, or at least hold on to what we've got long term. So for business continuity to work, we need to look at a few details. And I'm going to be scrolling through, and feel free to stretch out the document as much as you want. Print a copy, write it. If you've got a notebook, I strongly suggest that you write and follow along as we're going through it. So developing business continuity plans is a handful of details. It's about identifying who's responsible inside your business for making decisions, and not just who's responsible for decisions, but all the who's of your business. So in this segment of the document here, we'll see this: identify the who's in your business, main contacts, supervisors, managers, contractors, clients, suppliers, etc. When businesses suffer interruptions in their process and their flow or in their business, the quicker you can get to information, the faster you can make key decisions on whether businesses can continue, whether businesses must pause, or whether businesses must shut down. Understand, for a continuity plan, it is to always reduce to the greatest extent the amount of disruption that a business is going to suffer. There is next to no method that will keep you from suffering any form of disruption, because otherwise it would mean a level of hypervigilance that sadly most of us aren't capable of. So early on in business continuity, first knowing all the who's that need to be in place for your business, who I am individually as a business owner, if I have partners, managers, and supervisors, depending on the size of my business. Of course, my key clients and customers. It's always best to keep track of all of your clients and customers, but who your key clients and customers are, and then ultimately where our suppliers, materials, or the goods that we use to transact business come from. And then, of course, identifying the what's in our business. In other words, the types of disasters that we can be dealing with. For example, a worldwide pandemic, illness, or viral or bacterial infection. What our responses are going to be. If and what we need in the form of action plans, safety plans and protocols, procedures, human resources plans, and also identifying what exterior partners or players we will need to transact or help us on that behalf. As an example on this call is Jackson Fisk, a client and a friend of mine that runs a safety company. So if your business must adhere to certain safety protocols, for example, then having an external partner identified in the who, so somebody who might be supplying something to you, and also what the contingency or what the service they're going to provide in case something happens. And then, of course, the whens. Now, whens inside of business continuity planning are really quite simple. They break down into a handful of segments. And in the document, you'll see here before, during, and after. If we have enough notice and time, and to a large extent, we did not. We watched the advent of COVID-19 begin going all the way back to December and into January in China, and then it started to expand very rapidly in the last 70 to 80 days. It's gone from what first appeared to be a local regional event occurring in China to being worldwide. In other words, affecting nearly every country on the planet and nearly every major population center. So being able to look at where we sit now, which is certainly the during portion of it, what we need to happen as this moves forward and we get to after the primary effect or the disruption that we have on our business, and then post-recovery period planning. But our ability to look at what we should have taken stock of before can mean that as we're learning more, let's say instances being Italy, for example, Iran, North Korea, some other nations that are really being tasked and challenged extensively, far more than we may in certain regions, can tell us what our expectations are for coming next, and then of course to plan to mitigate that. So when we look at business continuity, it's about assessing risk, of course, figuring out key stakeholders or key important people, places, things that we're going to want, and what kind of precautions or behaviors that we're going to want to follow through. Now, for a business continuity plan to work, it means that on a regular basis, it needs to be reviewed. Now, for a lot of companies, reviewing more than once a year would probably be a little excessive, but in the, once more, I use the term hypervigilance, or a more hypervigilant environment that we are in now. A constant review while we're dealing with COVID itself, and then looking at the fallout that may come out because of a incident like COVID-19, which is, if COVID-19 comes and starts to drive people into their homes, starts to slow down or cool the economy, then we're looking at other conditions that come into play. In fact, there is some conversation or conjecture that we were another year away from another economic cooling period, or even another economic depression, that we had pretty much 12 to 18 more months of things working the way they were, and then it was going to start to cool down. So if we've just dealt with an environment like COVID-19, does that mean that with all the exterior challenges that are happening right now, slowed down business, closure of businesses, schools, etc., have we just accelerated what was going to be an economic impact already? So we must look at what happens in the case of a depression, in case of an interruption in supplies or suppliers, manufacturing, etc., and how that's going to affect our business, and then look for alternatives. And then inside of that ability to analyze, look at what troubles could be coming to us. We need to, of course, look for alternate suppliers, partners, vendors, etc., if in the case of us selling products, not just services, where we would need to find them. Lastly, for business continuity to really make a lot of sense, it always pays in moments of crisis to have access to information. That includes all your vital business records, your employee information, customers and vendors, whether you've got IT partners, safety, human resources, and where equipment and asset documents would come in, and how we can add that as well.
Bo ja to wszystko rysowałem oryginalnie, nie? Już wchodzę.
There we go. Our latest member just joined. Moving into document 1 or page 1 inside of it, and the first 2 pages in this document, and I'll scroll through it very quickly, and then I'll back up to the primary page itself. This is the Know Thyself portion for our business continuity. It is the primary information for where your business stands right now. This is a snapshot, and it's something that we want to be able to look at on a semi-regular basis. The entire business continuity or emergency preparedness plan, again, review probably once a year is very reasonable, but updates to key information for our business should happen on potentially a quarterly basis. It will depend on the style or type of business you have, and let's say what business cycle you go through. But business snapshots, and if we take a current, for example, we have to start with information resources. In other words, where is all the information that we collect on a regular basis? Do we use QuickBooks or Xero for our accounting, for example? Do we have outside information and resources? Do we have governmental legislation? Do we have outside partners and vendors? So anywhere where we have to collect information that comes into our business on a regular basis, we want to be able to itemize that in a hurry. Next, we have our safety policies and procedures. In other words, if our business is in an industry or a style of business that has to have very specific policies and procedures governing employee safety and the work environment, and more particularly when we are, of course, dealing with a pandemic or a certain event, then we need to isolate or diarize our safety policies and procedures in one spot. We have a safety policy and procedure manual. It is digital or physical. It is located in such and such a place. This would also be a place where we have safety policies and procedures where we might also itemize our exterior partners. So I have an outside safety person, or I have an internal safety person if my business is busy enough or it's the right style of business. I would have policies and procedures located digitally, shared drive, in the cloud, physical, and my safety provider is XYZ person or entity. Next, we have our HR policies and procedures when we're looking at our business snapshot. In other words, what are, if we've got people, in other words, care and feeding of the animals inside of our own zoo, our business, if you want to, if you allow me that humorous moment there, how do we care for our people and our staff? Where are our HR policies and procedures? Who is responsible internally for them? And again, what state are they in? Are they digital? Are they physical? Who has access to them, etc.? Last inside of this segment for businesses, because there are really 3 different sets of business-related function or operations, would be our standard operating procedures. If we ever thought about the methodology or the way we do things from a consistency standpoint, whether it is sales, whether it is finance, accounting, collections, whether it is core operations or manufacturing, what is the method that we do? If we've never identified our clear standard operating procedure, then of course that's a deficiency in our business, and it would be something that we would want to make up for and make up a standard for so our business can more readily operate in times of crises. The standard operating procedures are the methods from A to Z, from phone call, email, right through to getting paid, all of the steps that our business goes through. This is where you would be recording if and where your standard operating procedures, much like your safety policies, HR policies, or where your information resources would come in, and where or who our internal resources and partners are. Now, there's a number of people on this call that I know personally, and I also know they run small businesses or solopreneurs, which means for safety or HR or standard operating procedures, you are the end resource. And that is okay. That is perfectly okay. But if something were to happen, in the case of COVID-19, for example, something were to happen and you were to become ill and you become incapacitated for a time, somebody somewhere else may need access to this information so that they can either continue the business or so that they can find the information they need to pause, to talk to clients and customers, to talk to external partners, etc., to make sense of what's going on in the business, to wind it down, wind it in, or to be able to effectively help or assist you while you are not able to perform your regular functions and duties. So if we've got our safety policies, procedures, HR policies, procedures, standard operating procedures inside of our current business snapshot, we need to have the what itemized here. Of course, this goes back to the what, who, when that we discussed at the very beginning. Who's responsible and itemized right in here. And then, of course, how we would be able to communicate with those people. So once more, snapshot of our current business and where it stands. And if we don't have this information, this needs to be something that we are planning for effectively and that we're putting into place for our business. Next little segment down on page 1 of the 2-page snapshot for your business has to do with government legislation and legal information needs. Do you have outside partners or vendors? Do you have government legislation, whether it's regional, local, or national, that governs the industry that you're in? Is there anything that somebody would need to be mindful of if they're stepping in to help with your business continuity? Past that are emergency contacts. This is a primary list. Emergency contact lists in business continuity include all of your major partners or players. So if I had, for example, an HR partner or a safety partner or internal managers or all of the senior managers and leaders in the business, if I had business partners, or as well inside of emergency contacts includes information like 911, regional police, regional emergency services, regional fire services, etc. Different areas in the world are dependent on how we communicate with different emergency services. Different numbers apply to different places. So who do we reach out to and talk to? Under our emergency contacts, where's our accountant? Where's our primary banking partner, etc.? This is information, once more, that in the case of an emergency, where do I find enough of this information to be able to either make sense or communicate with key stakeholders? And bear with me while I use that word for a moment. Stakeholder is somebody who is important to your business, but not necessarily a partner involved in your business. Somebody who can help assist or is important for the operations of your business. So if you hear me use stakeholder a bunch in the next hour and 45 minutes, bear with me, and that merely means people that are important to the business, not necessarily directly involved. So emergency contacts is going to include things like our key stakeholders and emergency services, etc. On page 2, we have more of the direct information as in the business is operating. So first of all, we have our finances, banking, lending, reserves. This is where you would actually itemize your current accounts and account-based information. I have $1,000 in account 1 and $1,000 in account 2, and I have a corporate credit card that has X amount of credit, and here's all of my partners, and here's where my lending is. I have lending from banks and from private investments, and this is what I have available for my financial snapshot for my business. Next is my accounting bookkeeping partners. Of course, under emergency contacts, we would have the information there, but this is where we can specify our actual accounting. Some businesses may have external bookkeepers or internal bookkeepers. They may have external or internal accounting resources, who those people are, and the ability for us to be able to reach out to them and communicate with them very, very quickly. Next then is fiduciary responsibilities for business. If you have partners, you have, once again, key stakeholders, but those that are involved directly in the operation of the business, silent partners, etc., family members, perhaps in the case of businesses that have moved generationally. This is where you would list those people first of all and who their responsibilities are. If I use an example, I have a client that is an electrical company, and there are 3 partners involved in the business. One of them is a silent partner as he runs an entirely different business. Actually, none of the employees even know who the silent partner is. In the instance where the 2 primary partners had just traveled for a major contracted work, if something had happened, if this document is not in place, how do any of the key managers or supervisors of the business know that there's a third partner unless a document like this exists where you can look and see partner 1, partner 2, partner 3. Oh, there happens to be a third individual. So us knowing who would have fiduciary responsibility, and that's the technical term for somebody who can make primary operating executive decisions and also has responsibility for the outcome, outkeep, or overall health and welfare of the business. Some businesses, and again, we're talking to an awful lot of smaller based businesses right now on this call, may not be the case. That doesn't mean you have to necessarily rush out to find one, but if there are people that are involved in making those decisions and that could be held accountable in the case of the financial strength of the business itself, this is where you would want who they are and what their primary responsibilities are for the business itself. Lastly, operating responsibilities for the business. This is where you might have internals, sales, marketing, operations, manufacturing, supplies, shipping, receiving, etc. We have all of this itemized in a bulk extent earlier in our document on page 1, but now this is where we start to define it and break it down a little further. So operating responsibilities, an example, if you are manufacturing something or you're supplying something, who is responsible for shipping, receiving, who's responsible for sales, who's responsible for customer service, etc. If it's just you, yourself, and you, that's okay. Then this document should say you, yourself, and you, and maybe you want to use that language. So let me copyright it first, and then I'll charge you 3 cents for it. But operating responsibilities for our business needs to outline who's responsible for every major segment. Some businesses have a number of employees. Some businesses have few employees. I've seen businesses with hundreds of employees and where this operating responsibilities would be 4 or 5 names. I've seen smaller companies with 8 or 10 employees where every one of the names would have been listed on this document simply because they fulfilled a very specific role inside the business. So for us, this is what you would call the responsibility partner and direct information for the business. In other words, who makes financial decisions, where the current state of our finances are at, who our financial bookkeeping partners are, and who makes operational decisions or responsibilities on a day-to-day basis. Whereas on page 1, this is where we collect all of our current information, safety information, human resources, standard operating procedures if we have them, any legislation, legal information that we need to know, which would include our legal partners. And then of course our emergency contacts, starting with emergency services, local, regional, national government agencies, if we had to get all of them, taxation departments, etc., payroll partners, and then of course our own internal lists as well, names of the partners, managers, senior supervisors, etc., so that in a case of a crisis, we can reach out effectively to people and help them or have them help us to understand what decisions need to be made next for the business. So that's an awful lot of talking out of me for the last 15 minutes. Is this clear and concise enough so far on the call that if we were to walk away right now, we would be able to, not necessarily confidently, but comfortably start to fill in our own information based on our business?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Ilya, how you doing, brother?
Very straightforward, Mitch. Very good.
Thank you.
I'm doing medium well.
Awesome. All right. So we're here, and if that's concise enough now, understand, when we come away out of this call, questions, comments, concerns, anything like that, one moment, please. What do we have here? One chat window coming up. Awesome. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move down further in the document. Should you have questions, comments, or concerns, and I want this to be an extension to everybody on this call, for those that are involved in outside organizations that I'm involved in, et cetera, or that are familiar with me at all from a coaching perspective, I have made it my mandate amongst myself and my partners to be of assistance all day, every day, 24 hours a day. If this document doesn't make sense, you have questions, comments, concerns, or you want more insight and input, do not hesitate to reach out to me after. Chances are you were introduced to this link, let's say through Facebook. You can find either of my 2 major organizations on there, Cyndicate.org or Mitch Cammidge Coaching. Please reach me, message me, email me. I will be happy to get onto a Zoom call and help you work through this as well. That is the best I can do for the world out there at large, and this is something I'm happy to help with to the greatest extent. So if we're good, I'm going to move forward to the next portion of our document. This is where we start. Love you too, brother. This is where we start to plan our actual internal stakeholders. The information that we had earlier is the quick, concise. In other words, it's the digest version of our business. Where do I find all the information? If I had to hand, and I'm going to do this for a moment. I'm going to hold this up and hold it up in front of the camera just to be cheesy. If I take these 2 pages with all of these boxes, all 10 of these boxes, I can take them, I can stick them together, and I can hand them to somebody. I can transmit it to another human being or send it digitally, and fast, you can find some key information about the business. But this next one is actually breaking down the information who are key stakeholders. Remember that who segment from the very beginning? Multiple copies are here. Print them, build digital extras, whatever you need to do. This is where we build the actual database for the information we need for the who's. So in this case, where we've got planning team, identify key roles and responsibilities. Who do we have? We have a business owner, we have a financial partner, we have outside contractors, vendors. We have ones that are providing primary services to our business, human resources, safety, emergency response, etc. They are a manager or a supervisor inside my business, or they're a primary client or customer. This is where we collect the who's and all of the data that it takes to communicate with those people. Name, phone number, email, physical address if we need to, and then some notes based off of their primary function. In other words, we have a client, the name is Bob Smith, phone number is 555-555-5555, email address is bobsmith@bobsmith.com, etc. Primary function, Bob is a client and a customer, worked with us for so long. Here's primarily what kind of business he's been with. And you'll see this little rank box over here. This is incredibly important. We break down information later. If we go through the exercise of filling out dozens of these for information, it also pays for us to have a priority system on who needs to be communicated with first. I leave that information, but if I had to suggest a format, I would suggest a really simple method like 1 through 10, 1 being most important, 10 being least important. As you collect the information for the people that we should be communicating with and doing business with on a regular basis, and we're itemizing whether they're internal partners, they're our financial providers, they're a manager that we've got working with us, they provide outside services, they're a contractor that they might do work with us regularly, or they're an important client or customer, also pays to give them a rank. If something critical happens in a hurry, who should call who first? Otherwise, most people would look at this list and say, I think it's important that I call Mitch's clients and customers. He got really ill. He fell down a well, forgive the humor for a moment, but anything that would take me out of commission, so I should start calling. But it would behoove me to make sure on a regular basis that I updated this list so that the people from the highest priority, highest need, most importance are the ones that are communicated with first, and that way people can prioritize their time better. So don't be afraid to judge people and give them a number. But make sure that this is where we are collecting the actual information that identifies all of the major players in our business. If your business has hundreds and hundreds of customers, then perhaps part of your document planning does not include necessarily filling this out for everybody, but instead itemizing a client management system, client retention system, CMS, CRM, or else having just a database somewhere, a spreadsheet, for example, that might have all of your customer information, but collecting the kind of stuff that we need so that we can reach out and communicate with people in a hurry. I've got just a quick request. So if everybody can hear me, the actual document for, somebody just messaged me privately. The actual document itself, if you open up the chat window, you'll see the Drive folder link to download the PDF so that you can follow along as well. You'll be able to download a copy to work with as well. So thanks for asking for clarification. So this is 2 pages, not to suggest that there are only 4 important people in your business, but to give you enough copies to start with and work through itself as an example so that we can keep on track, on pace for the most important people. Now, what's funny about what happens in a crisis, because this is a conversation that I had, in fact, about 2 hours ago today, and not the first time I've had this conversation. Mitch, in the case of an emergency, how do we communicate with each other? Well, we're dealing with that right now. Okay, I understand. But how do we communicate with each other? And so a really simple method that we devised amongst us was to use a 3-layered system. First of all, phone calls. That way we can leave voice messages if we need to. Secondly would be text messages, but that means that we are at the subject to national and regional telecommunications. What if there's an outage? And the third that we decided to use was actually WhatsApp, because WhatsApp is backed up by Facebook. Now, if we lose all regional or local communications, let's say telecommunications infrastructure, including internet, well, probably not many ways for us to communicate at that point short of carrier pigeon. But it pays to have multiple avenues to communicate, which is why from a basic information standpoint, we have name, phone number, email address. That way it's relying on two different methods to communicate. And then of course, the onus or responsibility would be upon you to decide extra, apologies, just another message popped up, to decide extra what other communication methods we would want to use and how to be able to reach out to people primarily for that. Does that make sense? Okay. So feel free to make as many copies as you need or find it yourself. But the idea with business continuity planning, not the idea, the actual methodology, is to make sure all of our information is contained and housed in one place. Whether it's a physical document, digital document, or a combination thereof, we want to ensure that we can get as much information together collected into one spot at a given time, and then get that to either disseminate or be usable for ourselves or other people that can make primary decisions. The next segment inside of business continuity emergency preparedness planning is obviously the actual organization. It's org chart itself. There's a very simple little graphic, for example. This is something that Mother Google can resolve, but it is important to itemize who fits where. Elia, thanks for having a laugh, buddy. I love you too. Org charts are incredibly important. You get my org chart, well, there would be, if I go down here and I draw a little person, that would be me standing here in the middle. But that is not the end result of my business, because all of the communication planning and business-based information that I have added ahead of time means that all of those people are primary partners or providers actually all connect to me. So in my organizational chart, I might list myself, let's say, at the middle, because I like the spider web analogy. So I might have a series of offshoots, branches, or strands of the web coming out for me that would connect to clients and customers, connect to partners and other organizations, connect to other people that I would trust in the instance of what's happening in my business or for business continuity. And in fact, for a couple of voices on this call, they would get this when I said that one of my backup plans is my own coach. I have a coach, and he would be my primary backup in instance that something terrible happened to me. So I could make sure that my clients were being cared for to the best possible that they could. And then what would also be an extension for my organization chart would be my wife. While I'm the primary business owner, my wife would be the person who would be tasked making certain decisions. Another person that would be implementable inside my organizational chart would be my financial planner. I have an incredibly close relationship with the person that I trust to take care of me and my family's health and welfare should something happen. And that person is one that's got some primary responsibilities. I've even invested with certain fiduciary responsibilities to make decisions based on what's happening to my business. So this organization chart, if it's a matter of just me, myself, and I, is not one stick figure in the middle of this page with nothing connecting. From here, I would want to draw lines to, again, once more from a visual representation standpoint, primary clients and customers, secondary clients and customers, vendors or partners that could help my business, and key stakeholders. In fact, one of the people that I would communicate with on a regular basis in the time of a crisis would be a former business partner that I have. Why? We work very well together, and I could trust for some of his decision-making responsibilities or assistance when it comes to this business. So it'd be very important for anybody, let's say, for example, my wife, to look at this document and then visually be able to represent who needs to be communicated what. And that's where from here, we would back up to, let's say, our priority tree from our contact info for who we have over here. Now, in this case, does it really fit into these categories? No, that's okay. You can write in whatever you need to fit from an outside person who's a primary communication point, but that's where their communication information would come in, and clearly you would rank them quite a bit higher than you would everywhere else. But your hierarchy chart for your business, the larger the business, the more important it is for organizations to break down. Now, while we do have an awful lot of Canadian people on this call, we have a couple people calling in from the US. So hello, thanks for joining us. I'm going to use the US as an example from a hierarchy basis. In the United States, we of course know of the president and the vice president, et cetera, but there's actually a hierarchy of need and control in the case of crises, where the president has primary control, and if something happens to the president, it goes to the vice president. From the vice president, it goes to the Secretary of State. From the Secretary of State, and continues to move down through the primary roles inside of cabinet. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Interior, et cetera. So you can look at a hierarchy chart for the United States for the actual governance from the president working down, including members of Congress, Senate, et cetera, who would be responsible if something was to happen to the person above. It is important in little businesses for people to know where the buck stops. In other words, who can make primary decisions, who would be able to help. And in larger organizations, it is important for people to know where they need to go through for information, ideas, suggestions, leadership, or management next. Little businesses tend to be more organic, but it doesn't mean that people are not there to help, provide assistance and information. Larger the organization, the more of this needs to be understood. So I may go, if I'm a bigger organization, I may go directly to my supervisor or manager. My supervisor or manager may go to, let's say, a regional director. Regional director may go up into one of the vice president's offices, and the vice president would go all the way up to the CEO, president of the board. But for a smaller organization, guess what? I am chief cook and bottle washer for my business. So the buck kind of stops with me, unless, of course, somebody else needs to help. Financial advisor, accounting partner, former business partner, spouse, primary clients, customers, outside partners and vendors. So I've got a partner in another organization. That person would be integral to this. My financial services advisor, my financial planner would be responsible for making certain decisions. My coach would be responsible for making certain decisions, or client care. So we would want to be able to draw and visualize that itself so that we can show other people quickly. Does that make sense? Questions or comments while we're all this one right now? No? Good to go? Okay. This is where the heavy lifting starts to happen inside of our business. You're thinking, well, Mitch, this is exhaustive and I got to start to collect a lot of this information. This is where we actually start to plan based on what our business itself is doing. This area of the document comes into our essential services. What is our primary service, products, or offerings? And in other words, what does our business do? We want to be able to list prices, cost, how long it would take to replenish supplies, materials in our inventory, and our plans to maintain them. Now, this document could be hundreds and hundreds of items in size. It could be one or two. In my instance, if I use my example, there's a handful of things that I do. I provide direct line coaching to businesses. I provide strategic services, in other words, more heavy lifting inside of companies. I speak and provide education through seminars, online services, etc. And that's pretty much it. There are other things if I wanted to get really individual about what I do on a day-to-day basis, but I might use one of these pages and there might be one itemization. So here's my price. Here's what it costs for me to deliver. And if I had any materials, supplies, etc., what they are, where they can be found, and what my replenishment cycle is. So in the case of outside vendors or services, in other words, we have materials or products that we're selling. If we have manufacturers locally, nationally, or internationally, where they are, what they're doing, where they come from. And if we get a disruption of service, or in the instance where we're looking at a major disruption in the heart of manufacturing, coming out of China, for example, where do we find other materials and services? Do we find them in Europe? Do we find them in America? Do we find them in Central, South America? Do we find them in Africa? Do we find them locally? Can we switch suppliers to locally? So this is where we look at the individual things that our business actually does. What is our service, or what is our product offering that we give to the marketplace, and how do we fulfill that for our clients and customers? And then these segments, once again, don't take the size of the box as your only spot to do this in. The reality might be is that you may have a great deal of information that won't fit into this little tiny box. So don't look to fit it into this little tiny box. This is where a document like this adapts to what your company's needs are. But if we don't look at our actual services, products, offering, or commodities that we have, what our actual pricing and cost is, then in the instance of an interruption, for example, how do we continue? What can we continue with? And in a marketplace that's distressed or challenged, what can we actually do to compromise? Businesses are always making decisions, and always, regardless, there's very few that don't, on whether price matches what the market is willing to pay for something. And in a distressed market, it pays for us to understand where our products come from, what we're charging, where we're going to get resupply if necessary, how we can maintain in the case of disruption, and what we're willing to compromise on when it comes to price versus cost. Obviously, you can't make less than what it would cost to deliver something. Your product or service may not have a price point or a need or an attraction depending on market right now. But it pays to be able to look at it first and then to be able to make an informed decision. So this is where you could have either one or two or three services, products, offerings, or commodities, let's say like my business, or where you could have dozens or hundreds. Pays to understand all this information. Questions, comments with this? Feedback or thoughts?
Yeah, what if the manufacturer got the monopoly? Start looking for complementary products?
Exactly. So we're in certain markets, and Ilya, I'm glad I know this was not targeted to you, but yes, I'm glad you brought it up. In some cases where we've got a superior product, for example, let's say your business was Macworld, and in our local marketplace, so just in and around Edmonton, we've had a retailer called Macworld for 37 years now. And they were one of the first private resellers and service providers for all things Mac, all things Apple. And when the iPhone launched in 2007, they started doing service on iPhone, even though Apple was not certifying or authorizing outside vendors to be able to do this. So if a company like that, for example, that's working with a product for so very long, suddenly finds their primary supplier, let's say, closes the gates or doors, shuts down, suffers a failure, then in a hurry, they've got to start to look for complementary products or services. So Ilya, for you, for example, yes, we would want to look for complementary products or services. We would want to look for preferably local or regional providers first, so that we could look at diminishing or reducing the amount of disruption like we're experiencing right now in our marketplace would have. And long term, we would need to look for something that was providing a product or a commodity that matched, or we felt matched, as closely to the quality that we were using previously. Whether we implement or not is always a business or operations based question. But in the case of something like we're experiencing right now, it pays to look at outside alternatives, particularly if we have to import when it comes to materials, because there's a great deal of disruption right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Okay.
Sorry, Mitch, I had mute
Yep.
on. We're experiencing a rather interesting crisis right now in terms of technology hardware, both from servers all the way down to desktops. In Wunan, majority of all of the parts and stuff are coming from there for Lenovo, Dell, all of this. So basically, we've found ways to kind of repurpose people's home systems and whatnot in a secure way. But after this all blows over, we're looking at mandating that a company, as part of their business continuity plan, actually stocks even lower grade computers for events such as this, so that they would have a fleet that they could take with them. But any other suggestions? I don't know if anybody else is facing this. I'm just curious. I've seen lineups which is not following the self-isolation rules or distancing rules, but at Staples, Best Buy, they've bought up absolutely everything. We have no stock in North America right now.
Yeah, Jay, and I'm glad you piped up as well, because similar to Ilya, you're going to be experiencing disruption because the bulk of what we take for granted as our supply and our suppliers is coming directly overseas. One of the parts now, this is not the first time in the last 10 days I've heard the technology question. I know that the secondary resale market right now, in particularly older used goods, is coming in a high demand. And from a short-term disruption standpoint, the only thing I could suggest would be things immediately or early on, things like recyclers, technology redistributors, etc., refurbishers. Longer term, actually, I know that there are a few smaller marquee or boutique manufacturers, even from a local perspective, And then where, Jay, for example, you're in the greater Edmonton marketplace. So, I share the same marketplace. We have access to resources with Alberta Research Park, U of A, Nate's technology division, outside technology partners. So when it comes to our service and supply disruption, depending on what it is that we're missing, we are, of course, always at the mercy of information first, and then where the primary supplies come from. In the case of a technology disruption, we actually may be looking at certain instances where we're actually rolling back or backdating on some technology until we can allow partners to come in or replenish, or for inventory and volume to start to catch up, and to the best of our ability there. There's no perfect answer, unfortunately, this early in disruption, but what we can do is look for as many of these other supplies. And so where our primary vendors, the OEM expresses, and again, for some people on the call, I apologize for using local regional suppliers to prove a point or an example. But we've got some vendors like that, and then we've got some national, international chains that are getting hit and run. We want to be looking for some of these secondary resellers, resupplies, remanufacturers, etc. And then, of course, there's always the age-old hoarders as well. So our ability to maybe make maybe it's the wrong word, to consider making a call out to the marketplace, looking for those people that are sitting on used-based equipment that we could potentially put to use, even from a short-term basis, to help support our clients and customers, would be a consideration.
Could I just make a point? I think you should have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. This is Doc. Like, I work with Mitch, and in any crisis, any one of your plans is likely not going to work. So you should have many plans all in a row. If you have one supplier, you should have 5. If you have one type of computer, you should have plans for other ones. Because right now, it's likely to get broken. Everything's likely to get broken. That includes financial institutions may go down, so you must have a plan to deal with cash shortages, etc. I think everybody should have a certain amount of money in cash right now, just in case they have to pay certain bills. If you have people that are reliant on medications, they should have at least a 3-month supply of medications immediately, because again, you're going to be shorted. Okay, it's the realities of the situation right now. You have to plan for contingencies.
Doc,
yeah, I want to add to that though. We did have, Barry's got a very good point, and we did have that same plan. So we've got 6 distributors across North America right now. Not a single one of them have a computer in stock. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of extraordinary circumstance. Plus, and this is a little bit third party, it's not so much for my company that I need to have all these spares. It's me convincing third-party clients that they need to have it to deal with said pandemic, right? So yeah, it's a challenge, but I get it. I appreciate the feedback. I think that just from an IT perspective, to add to what Mitch was originally saying, this is unprecedented in terms of stock and where everything comes from. And I think Barry can add to this. We all know where the medications are being made and where all the masks are coming from. So,
well, guess where it's being made? The problem is the biggest country in the world that has most of the problems, and that's China.
That's right.
So, unfortunately, they're in an influx right now. But also, fortunately, they may be the first to recover. The problem is the communication systems to them is going to be very shattered. So we got to be aware of that.
Awesome, Doc. Thank you very much, Jay. If you'd like, let's you and I have a conversation out of scope here a little later on.
Will do. Thank you.
This is Gary. I'd like to have a conversation. Probably not for this one, although the conversation that we have, we could share with the participants. But I've got some ideas that we could actually include into that for future.
Okay, Gary. Thank you very much. So we're looking at our price cost replenishment and stuff like that. Does it make sense from a planning perspective right now for everybody? Okay. Next page down in our document, once we've looked at our primary services, products, offerings, or commodities, where our supplies and our costing, and where secondary, third, tertiary, and extended comes into, we want to look at essential services. What are our primary internal systems? What parts of our business cannot stop no matter what? So if we are in product sales and services, obviously our primary marketing sales engine, if it's at all, if it's all effective or operational at the current moment, what are the bits and pieces in our businesses individually that must operate, must continue to function no matter what? And then we want to look at prioritizing each one of those functions. So if we think of businesses from primary or fundamental standpoint or structure, for example, we have the financial component of our business, and our financial component would include our cash flow, our accounting bookkeeping cycle, and our short-term and long-range planning. So out of each of these, what is the most important function? What is the current way that it works as well? And what is the priority out of each of those? When we look at our core operations, in other words, human resource capital or our people, our sales, our marketing engine, the actual operation steps that we take on a regular basis, if we've got manufacturing, parts or services, what are going to be those, and what is our highest priority? So we want to be looking at our entire business, the entire picture that we've got right now, and prioritizing those functions that cannot or must not stop regardless of what happens to the rest of the market, what happens to the rest of the business. And then to all the words in a sentence. When we prioritize the most important portions of our business, then that means our time and attention when it is being challenged. For example, what we're dealing with in our current marketplace, that we will always spend time working in these areas first and come to other areas in our business later on. This is a giant empty box. One moment. Absolutely. Thank you. So our primary symptoms, internal processes, etc., we need to make best sense of what order they are. Sales, is it most important? Marketing, is it most important? Key client services and operations, which ones are most important? Cash flow management. If I'm recommending right now, when we look from an emergency preparedness standpoint and staring at what's happening inside of COVID-19, and to also mirror what Doc Leica was saying a moment ago, our cash flow and cash management becomes a primary function and system. What do we have? Where do we have it? How do we measure it? What are we holding on to? Our ability to sell or sustain whatever business we're generating right now becomes a primary function and goal. We want to be able to outline the basic steps in these processes. And once more, much like we were itemizing earlier on when we were looking at our business overall and who's responsible for what steps in the process we're going to take so that individuals, people, or let's say our external partners or vendors, or where we go back to our business hierarchy of needs, who needs to be responsible for this business and what decisions are going to be made individually. Some businesses can be incredibly complex. There can be dozens and dozens of internal systems. In fact, the larger the company, the more complexity we develop inside of our business. The smaller the business, usually the simpler the process or operations become. It pays or behooves us to look at those functions that we've got regularly as they stand now, understand the steps that go into those processes, and what is the highest priority for continuance. If a business must always be selling, in other words, it has a product or a commodity, then what is our primary sales or marketing function? Who is responsible? What are the steps that we take? And how are we going to be able to support it in challenge time? If we provide services, like my business, for example, who else can provide services? What would be the backup and the essential steps? What's going to be the method for delivery? And how important is it for that service to continue? If as part of my internal service, providing coaching services, as an example, to people, includes inside vendors or outside vendors or suppliers, who are they and what is the fastest way for me to onboard them or bring them into the business? So this is where, whether it is one single sheet of paper with a giant empty box, and there are 10 steps in here and we've prioritized them from 1 to 10 for what's most important to least important, or whether we have dozens and dozens of services because we have different avenues, veins, or lines of service and operation in our business, it pays to know what needs to be the functions that we work at first. So because I'm staring at Doc Leica's face right now as one of the little cameras for everybody that's up, to use the medical or the human body analogy, it is really important to keep the internal organs, the lungs, the heart, the cardiovascular and brain function operating before it is keeping the digits and limbs on your fingers and toes functioning first. So what are the most important or vital functions of the business? And then as that cascades down, where do we triage or deal with operations or bits and pieces of the business as we move down through the priority chain to keep things either moving or deciding whether it's something that we may or may not tie off? Thoughts, ideas, suggestions?
I don't know if this is relevant to every other business, but one thing that we ended up doing with our business is implementing a very robust documentation system. Yes, it's a little bit more on the technical side, but within that, we have our standard operating procedures. We could probably implement exactly what you have here as a template as well, Mitch.
Absolutely.
So I don't know, and I'm trying to wrap my head on and put my non-IT hat on, but I don't know if this is the right wording, but you should have your own internal, some sort of document or document management system where you have this, and then share that. The technology exists, even if you're using something like Dropbox, Google Docs, you can lock it down properly. But if you're talking business continuity and you have multiple stakeholders, that's how you would give them shared access and keep it updated in real time.
Yeah, absolutely. Jay, thank you for that. Well point and well versed. So where we go to our information management to start with, that would include, and I'm going to back up here for a moment. And Jay, that's a well put point. I will back up here a little bit more past the org chart. Contact info, where we get into our initial planning and our snapshot in our business, and we're looking at this very first box, information resources. This is where, as Jay put it so succinctly, would fill some of that information in. So where we have standard operating procedures, HR policies, safety policies, other internal documents. In other words, sales process, organizational chart, all of our financial contacts, where we itemize that much more clearly or succinctly a little further down in the business snapshot. This is where some of that information is going to. You will find this documentation in a Dropbox folder with this digital access, and here's the person who has access to it as well. Or this would be the person who'd be responsible. This is where the access point is, and this is how you communicate with them as well. So this is where we start to see elements inside of our business continuity or emergency preparedness plan. And Jay, thank you for bringing that up. Comes in. I would have information resources, Dropbox folder housing all of these different segments. These different segments, safety, HR, standard operating procedures, are housed here individually. Any of our legal information needs or our inside partners, emergency contacts will be listed. And so each one of these sections can be its own document, can be its own digital archive or resource, or it could be something like this 11-page document, for example, with all the information accounted, collected into one spot. But as you can hear, depending on the size of the business and the type of the business, the complexity or the amount of that data can start to spike in a hurry. And we would always want to be conscientious on the ability to transmit information first is the most critical. Next, the location of the information where people can get access to it. And then, of course, who's to operate or act on it as well. Business continuity plans will go back to the who, what, when at the very beginning. Who needs the information? What is that information, product, service, offering, or method for doing something? And when does it need to be transacted on? Business continuity plans are actually not much more complex than that, which is why I've tried to distill it to a much smaller document, going back to the very beginning. Once again, business continuity can be quite robust, quite large in size. I wanted to simplify it for our ability to plan in about 2 hours worth of time. So if we are good from here, I'm going to move down to where we actually go through some of our individual disaster preparedness as well. Okay. This is where we get to what we're dealing with right now, because we are all staring at essentially the same issue currently, and that doesn't mean there aren't others going on in the world, but what we're looking at right now. This is planning for the actual individual instances that we're dealing with. In this case, we've got type of disaster that we can be looking at. Disasters come in multiple flavors, but they usually come down to finite number of basic categories. Fire, something burns to the ground. Flood, far more water than our business is good at absorbing, hasn't come around. Disease, which is one that we're dealing with right now. Economic or disruption. Now, economic disruption category includes things like acts of terror, etc. We would have seen that. We would have seen the fallout from a disruption in the form of 9/11 as one of the most stark examples those of us in North America could be dealing with. Business disruption or disaster. In other words, something happens individual to the business itself. Examples that I know of recently in the last year, a business with a partnership where one of the partners passed away unexpectedly. That is a business disruption and can cause a great deal of chaos inside of a company. And then lastly, legal or financial. What happens when the financial structure or the legal structure of a business becomes challenged or becomes compromised? So being able to plan based on individual type may mean that we've got individual planning for what our business does in the instance of what it's doing. So whether we have fire, flood, diseases, economic or disruptive basic instances, in other words, things outside of our business, an actual business interruption of service itself, or we have a legal or financial challenge the business is dealing with. Now, this document, if we think of COVID, for example, we always want to itemize, again, once more by score, severity of disruption, 1 for worst, 5 for least. So if we take disease, so right here at the top of the page, I may circle disease, highlight it, color code it, whatever. Severity of disruption, I'm going to categorize this as a 1. Do I currently have any action plans? If I do have action plans, what are they? You're going, well, Mitch, action plans, we haven't itemized this yet. No, those come down further in the document. So action plans, what are going to be our immediate steps that we're going to take? What are they going to be? Where are they located? And who's going to be responsible? Do we have any safety plans that need to be enacted? In this case, where many of us are dealing with home isolation, quarantine, etc., or whether there's mandates that come because of actual industry, service, or our own internal policies and documents mandate them. Do we have a safety plan that becomes transacted when something like this happens? If so, what is it? Where is it? When will it come into effect? HR policies. Do we have individual people-based policies? And one moment, please. Chat. Absolutely. Thanks for the feedback. We have HR policies. In other words, what is our people capital or our human capital? If we don't have them, that's okay. Do we need to itemize them or do we need to build them into place? If so, what are they? Where are they? When do they become actionable? Do we have financial backup or financial partners that we're going to be working with? Do we have to itemize, organize an alternate work site? In other words, what happens when the disruption takes out or wipes out our current work environment, work site, or office? If we have certain environmental or massive scale disruptions, do we have or need a muster point? In other words, if we are working in an office or a business environment and we have a fire, then are we going to need a muster point? Where does everybody get out and where do they go to? If we've got a muster point, do we have a communication strategy as well? One moment, please. Thank you. Now we get to communication and muster strategy. In other words, how are we going to talk to each other and where are we going to do it? In the case of a physical disruption for our business, let's say a fire at a physical location, where would we go to and what is going to be the communication strategy? Who's going to be in charge? Have we itemized or built this? We're talking about a massive incident like COVID-19, for example. Well, severity of disruption. I think we could all agree that it's probably one of the worst we've seen. Do we have a consistent action plan, what we should do next? Not yet. We're trying to work on that right now. Do we have a safety plan in place? We might have a proto one because everybody's supposed to stay home. Do we have any HR policies? Bigger the business, the more likely we need to care and feed for the other people involved in our business. Do we have any outside financial backup and partners that we do need to transact with? Are we working from alternate work sites? Pretty much every one of us is sitting at home right now. Muster point, did we need to run from somewhere? Maybe not. Communication and muster strategy. What is going to be the method we're going to continue to communicate with either each other or our primary partners, etc.? And how are we going to convey that information that we need to do? This is where we come down to the before, during, after of it. Immediate actions before. If we had enough notice and time dealing with an incident or disruption, what would be the steps that a business would take to prepare for, shore up, or defend itself, whether successfully or unsuccessfully, from whatever incident's coming in ahead of time? So immediate actions may be in the form of disease control, for example. We know what's going on with COVID-19. We've been watching it as it spreads further out in the world. It is here in North America, and depending on where you are in North America, the severity for the infection rates, and et cetera, can be higher or lower, regionally, locally, and nationally as well. So if we are in a spot where it is not as severe as it may be in other places, what lessons can we take ahead of time, and what precautions or steps would our business need to take to minimize the disruption, or to be able to protect our employees or our products, services, and offerings before it reaches us and the severity increases? Immediate actions taken during, and I've worked this from a top-down perspective, not a left to right. Immediate actions during, while we're dealing with an individual crisis, like COVID-19, for example, what are the constant steps that we need to be taking during to mitigate, manage, or measure the disruption itself? That may very well come down to our standard operating procedures, or there may need to be an adaptation. So are there any different steps or additional steps that we need to add when we're taking action during disruptions? And then, of course, after disruptions, what does the business do, if it can, to return to its regular operating procedures? And then lastly, when we're dealing with certain disruptions, what is our expectation for recovery time? If we take the instance of COVID-19, we have not, in the modern digital world, or the modern world as it stands, dealt with an event as globally as applicable as what we're dealing with right now. So expectations on recovery, don't know. And in fact, I will say this with a little bit of humor, but trepidation as well. I may be a business coach, and I may help people with their businesses and mitigate, make decisions, and help them to hopefully realize more success and to get themselves out of trouble when it comes around to it. I do not now have a global pandemic playbook for small to medium business. Don't have it. So it might be a little terrifying to hear, but the reality of what we're facing right now does not come with a standard operating procedure. So it pays for us to look at our individual businesses, look at the service, products, offerings, or commodities that we have, and try and have a sense of realistic expectations on the amount of time it would take for our business to return to regular operations, or what conditions or steps we would need to understand so that our recovery time could be realistic. If we have any immediate action steps that we'd take before something happens, things that we need to be mindful of during so that our business operations can continue, and as soon as an incident is over. Now, in the case of something like COVID-19, where we have a global event, after is very nebulous right now. Where we have something that may be a little easier to understand in the form of disruption, let's say a physical location with a fire. What could have been the steps that were taken before? What would be the incident or the steps that we would take during the actual incident itself? In other words, our safety procedures, protocols, and then immediately after. Instances would be, for example, we would call our insurance company. We would make sure that all of our employees were accounted for. We would make sure that everybody is sent home, and we're looking at business continuity from alternate locations where we've itemized alternate work sites above. While the incident was happening, before or during, what was our muster point, what's going to be our communication strategy, etc. COVID-19 leaves us with a great number of unanswered questions, but for us to fill in, first of all, as much information as possible, and then to use the time and opportunity we've got right now in the form of some self-isolation to look very clearly at what's going on during, to make individual decisions on what we can learn based on our operations now as it stands, and then to be able to look at what our expectations are next. As isolation quarantine starts to wind down, what is going to be the activities or actions we need to take, first of all, to protect ourselves and our employees, if we've got them, what actions we will need to take for our business to return to its standard operating. And then if we stare at what we've got right now from a time perspective for COVID-19, how long we expect the disruption to have or take effect on our business, and how much time it would be to quote unquote return to normal. Thoughts, questions, comments?
What do you do, Mitch, in a scenario like this where it's so unprecedented that things could potentially come around, things could continue on for a very long time? How do you focus on the mental health of it if you're a business owner right now, trying to see kind of the silver lining in the middle of a pandemic? I've spent the last 2 weeks not only acting as, you know, people's trusted technology provider, but I think I should have a degree in psychology now as well, and crisis management. And for me, I'm lucky I have a good family system here, a supportive wife, but I can tell in people's voices the desperation and the fear. And I always try to tell people that we've come through worse things. It might not seem like it now over time. What's your tidbit of information on that to keep people kind of on a level playing field? You know, is it one breath, two breath, then take a step? Or I just like hearing other people's perspective on this.
Absolutely, Jake. If I can, we've had episodes from a health perspective that are just as severe but not as far-reaching. We'll go back to MERS and SARS, for example. We had what was now terrorist acts are terrorist acts, but disruptive basis like what happened in 9/11. Now, well, there's other incidents that have certainly been a lot larger in the world, but that one caused a great deal of attention and disruption. So these events all attack the psychology more than anything else. And what we're looking at here from a documenting standpoint has a lot to do with the external factors in our business. In other words, what is our operations, what are our partners, who are our employees, etc. But mental health and mental welfare are just as important a function of what we're doing here today as anything else. Every one of the segments, and I'm going to back up for a moment all the way to the beginning of the document here. When we look at most of this, this is tangible, tactile, or technical information for our actual business. In other words, who are our finance partners, who's our accounting and bookkeeping, who's operations, etc., governments, legislation, legal information. A lot more businesses are taking on things like business coaches, outside consultants, human resources partners, safety coordinators, etc. Those all become part of the actual operations of the business. In the case of people inside this call, I have current and former clients on the call right now, where information resources or internal or external partners might include, let's say, my role too. So our mental welfare needs to be something that we also make a part of our planning perspective. In other words, how do we take care of the health and welfare of ourselves, our employees, key stakeholders, and vendors? But that didn't answer your question. That's technical information. So you might have contact information in the form of a business coach, a psychologist, etc., a crisis manager, a member of clergy, church, etc., that you may be able to talk to that will help to mitigate or provide some solace or spiritual or mental sustenance. When we deal with instances like this, and this is going to be sadly very clinical for me to say first, it pays for us to understand how we make decisions. And one of the first places we make decisions, of course, inside of our brain is always that area that has us defend ourselves first and foremost. That area of our brain is really, really old, and it's quite primitive, but it has a great deal of use. That part of our brain, which has us largely feeling what we do right now, a sense of uncertainty, a sense of fear, worry over our own health and welfare, worry over our families, questions on how long our resources would last, whether we have enough food. A great outward example is going to be every person that bought far more toilet paper than they're going to need for a disease that actually doesn't cause you to poop yourself. I got to use the polite language for that. So that center of the brain is the one that does this. So when we can understand that we make decisions, all decisions from the same primary place in our brain, then it allows us to acknowledge it, to give it a name, and certainly not to tell ourselves that we're silly. But when we do that, then we can start to make better informed decisions. And by that, I mean, take this planning document. So if each of us spent the next hour after we're done this call, and to the best of our ability with a printed copy, filled in each one of these boxes, we would be already be doing far more therapy for our own sense of well-being and welfare, even if it does not physically manifest in a change in our situation than what we've got otherwise. Now, when you take our ability to plan and direct and use that as our weapon of choice, if you will, against fear and uncertainty, that actually starts to get the brain to work in a different spot. When we can get our brain to work in a different spot, in other words, logical thinking, different emotions other than fear, worry, and our need to protect ourselves first, then we're taking away our brain's ability to hijack our thinking. Once we've done that, then we can start to work on getting ourselves back to maybe emotional even keel, or even a more emotionally stable place. If we can set aside our emotional state long enough to have an impact where we complete something, like let's say planning this document, then we can make a decision to do something that will change our state for the better and remove more of the stress and worry. So if I use it as if I'm going to use our conversation as an example, if I finish the call right now, and I'm gonna turn my laptop. See that black square on the wall? That's my bad boy. That's my whiteboard. It's a giant sheet of black glass. I write neon colors on it. I do all of my planning and implementation for my own business, my clients, etc. up there. That is one of my center points for planning. Just hanging on the wall. It's 3 feet by 2.5, and I got some really bright colors. Well, something happens to me psychologically when I get into my planning and implementation phase. If I get to that board, I finish off this call and I think, you know what? I've just been preaching planning and preparedness. I have not taken enough steps myself. Okay, Mitch, let's go through your own document itself. I'll pick different colors, different items, because the actual practice and act of planning first moves my brain out of a fear-based place. Then by planning and acting, I'm doing something mechanical but progressive. So the higher order thinking in my brain, or the logic center of my brain, can tell the fear-based or the protective-based, like, hey, we're taking steps. Roll with us here. Work with me here. We're taking steps right now to try and problem solve. When I finish the problem solving, even if all of the actions are not actionable yet, my brain has a sense of completion. In other words, it says we recognized a threat or a challenge. We have identified it. We have taken direct steps. We have planned and implemented, and now we have completion. All of these work our brain away from the fear-based center of the brain. And understand that fear is really important. It is vital because it tells us to protect ourselves. It tells us to avoid predators and to avoid threats. But it is also an area that doesn't help us very much until after our initially identifying an issue. So small actions can lead to completion. When we get to completion, and you're going, it's really clinical, I just want to feel happy again. I actually don't want you to feel happy first. I want you to feel like you accomplished something. Because when you've completed a task, your brain has the ability to say, we've taken direct steps, we've finished something, and by that finishing and completion, we've actually moved further ahead than where we're at right now. We've got something to work with. From there, we can take direct actions or steps to create a better environment for happy or calmness. The next thing that we have to do is identify what we're, now I'm really deviating right now, so bear with me. I'll come back to emergency preparedness in a moment, but mental welfare is part of that too. If Jay, you'll allow me to take you through my specific steps, I will write as many notes as possible on my black glass whiteboard on the wall. I'll make sure that I've got a plan of action to work with. I'll make sure that they're executable or that I can finish something right away. Then when I've done finish something so I can get a sense of completion, I'll make sure that it's celebratory in nature. In other words, I did something that is going to better me, whether it's in the short term, immediate, or long term as well. And this is cause for recognition and celebration. Every time I find that I'm in constraint, if I can plan, complete, and celebrate something, even a simplest task, it is starting to rewire my brain to look for solutions and problem solving, even if it isn't directly related to the immediate issue that I'm facing. When I do that, my brain starts to think more clearly, and as challenges come up, it starts to looks for solutions as opposed to continuing to work itself through on the problems. Now, perhaps our call today means that the very next call I should book has more to do with mindset and being able to plan us to deal with stress management. But Jay, is that a helpful place to start when it comes to our mindset and our mentality with what we're dealing now?
I believe so. I just think, if anything, to give credence to what we're showing everybody here, I think we all have to come to a level of acceptance as well. That a lot of this, if not all of it, is out of our control. And so by nature, especially us entrepreneurs, we try to make things within our control and control things so that we have favorable outcomes. But right now, I think we all kind of just have to get on the boat and get ready to ride the waves and accept that there will be waves and accept that we have a boat.
Yeah, that is a fantastic point. And now, Jay, you said something really, really important here too, which is why this call is working right now. Everybody's listening very intently. Everybody's writing a lot of notes. While that's all happening, your brain is moving away from that fear-based center. But the other part we're getting to, which is so dangerous with COVID-19 and self-isolation, I'm not preaching running out into the streets and going to find somebody to hug. I'm preaching finding somebody or group or organization like this call today, where you have the opportunity just even to say, man, this sucks. This really sucks right now. And then everybody else can nod their head and go, yeah, it really sucks. What do? I don't know, but we got to do something. What should we do? Here's an idea. Okay, good. So for everybody that's finding themselves in an isolation position, inclusion decision-making, now go back to our planning document for a moment. Every one of the people that is an immediate partner, key stakeholder, or somebody important to your business are people that you should also be, through crisis management, communicating with on a regular basis. In fact, we had such a small segment, communication and muster strategy, inside the type of disaster or interruption. But how much more palatable or powerful does it become when you're trying to manage a crisis you're going through, when you're communicating with all your key stakeholders, important partners, et cetera? That becomes part of our own therapy, if you will, to deal with when we are dealing with a crisis like COVID-19, for example. Just the act of being able to reach out, communicate with other people, helps to remove some of the stigma and the challenges that we're facing, and manage to be able to help to reduce the pressure that we're feeling inside of our own head.
Yeah, Mitch, could I intervene for a sec, Doc?
Absolutely.
Sorry, I had to leave for a minute because my power died and I had to find my power cord. I've been running on auxiliary all day. So the important thing about any crisis is there will be uncertainty. There will be things happening. That's why plans have to be in order. You can fight a lot of anxiety and so on with planning and knowledge. And Mitch and I had a good talk about how we can do this and how it's important to have the right mindset. From knowledge comes power. And that's the important thing, that you have a lot of resources here, everyone. You have a lot of power as a result of it. You know, I was a doctor that used to deal with life and death situations. I was a doctor that had to deal with crises all the time. The point is, you deal with things that you can deal with, and you realize you can't do everything. It's out of your limitations, but it's important to deal with what you can and not hunker down, not go and watch Netflix for 24 hours a day, not go and hide your head in the sand, but to realize that there are things that are going to happen. And if you can predict what's going to happen, you pretty well can overcome it. And if you can't predict what's going on, to have another plan to deal with it and manage it. Simple. All crisis, you know, the word crisis is a Chinese symbol that means danger and opportunity. So on one hand, you have this immense danger. On this other hand, you have this immense opportunity. And from the two together, those that get through this better are going to be stronger and much more they're going to have, it's going to be the oyster for them after all this. It's going to be something that you've gotten through the storm. You didn't hunker down. You didn't get destroyed by it, but you weathered the storm. And then guess what happens afterwards? Interesting, 1930s, stock market got cut in half. 4 years later, it was higher than it ever was. So the numbers there were much smaller than they are now. But that's exactly what's going to happen again, based on predictions. Although oil is being decimated right now, do you think the demand for oil is going to lessen or increase as things go up? Guess what? Industry is going to get back together. Everything's going to go full tilt as we rebuild from this, and things are going to go crazy again. The biggest period of expansion was right after the Second World War, where everything was decimated. Things went crazy. And that's the baby boomer generation that we've been through and everything else. So we're going to have a second baby boomer generation, and it's going to go crazy. You know, the best predictor of the future is the past. And if you don't know history, then you'll be destroyed by it. So it's very important to learn from those lessons. I was reading on fear today, and everybody's heard the expression, you have nothing to fear but fear itself. Well, that speech was given by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932 as part of his inauguration address, as he started what was called the New Deal, which caused the Americas to boom again and become a huge power after all that. And if anybody wants to learn words of wisdom, I encourage you to look up that speech. It's on Wikipedia. It's amazing. It truly is amazing. The guy was a true elocutionist, could speak better than almost anybody else. But the point I'm trying to say is that history is repeating right now. That history is going on right now. So we can expect much worse times. We can expect every day is going to be worse. As the level of fear rises, we're going to get clamped down more. Today, Ontario shut down everything except for essential services. I found it interesting that one of the essential services was liquor stores. So they got their priorities straight there. Okay, so they really, the essential services are very, very important for them, but they've shut down everything else. So I suspect you're going to see more and more of that. My secretary packed up everything and moved her home today to do everything from home. My accountant did the same thing. We're planning the office that I'm in, which is in a Regis building in First Edmonton Place, is going to close by Friday. I suspect you're going to see more and more closures as this goes on. So the question is how you're going to keep working, how you're going to keep doing things. Mitch has a lot of good plans. They're I wouldn't say they're bulletproof, but they certainly are great plans to help get through this disaster. I think the other thing you must equip yourself is with the right mindset. And you got to realize, no matter what happens, you're stronger than that. And you've shown that by getting to the point you are right now. And you got to understand that the true integrity of this, that getting through this crisis is you. You got to be stronger than the storm. If you've gotten everything battened down, if you got all the hatches battened down, the storm isn't very hard to get through, you know, and that's the point of getting through these storms here. You know, things could go really crazy. The government today is talking about implementing the War Measures Act if everything goes bad. Now, the very fact that they're talking about that is scary because all personal liberties go away at that time.
Awesome, Doc.
They say they'll only invoke it if things get really bad, but you know, things, you got to be ready for it. You got to be ready for everything. Be ready to go through the storm. That's all I have to say.
Doc, thank you. Thank you very much. Jay, helpful?
Yeah, very much so. The only one last thing I wanted to add to that, I appreciate both your guys' sage wisdom, and I didn't mean to hijack this call talking about current affairs, but you know, I've had a couple of my clients that are pretty much going to shut down. They were smaller businesses, very emotional conversations with them. And I had just talked to them one-on-one and said, you know, a lot of this is out of your control. Therefore, it's not a fault thing. It's more of a matter of circumstance. And we have to just accept that. And like Doc said, you know, once you weather the storm, the opportunities are going to be great. So I think that we have to look past the immediate And so I'm just grateful to be part of this group and to have both of you, and the more that I meet of you, available to us during these times of crisis.
What I've also got to say just for a minute is that not only is this going to be damaging, it's going to be mentally damaging. And so that's where you really have to be very strong through this. The greatest disaster from the 30s were the number of people that felt they couldn't do anything after it. And that was the scary thing about it. So the important thing is not to go to that headspace. I think right now we have the ability to withstand that and go through that. But again, when things are all going bad, you blame yourself for everything. That's what entrepreneurs do.
Doc, let me drag this back here. Okay, please. All right, so we're on to our actual disaster interruption and preparedness. And of course, we've had a dissertation to go into when it comes to our psychology and our framework. Inside of this, to look at the individual incidents, as in the case of disease with COVID-19, for example, the severity of the disruption we're going through, of course, if we've got action plans in place, et cetera, the actual safety plans, HR policies, et cetera, that we might need. In the case of certain instances, what would we need to plan? What would be the actions we would want to take before, during, and after? And that's where we come to the final page inside of our document for today, which is the actual individual action plan that we want to take as each individual incident comes in. So the smaller section on the page above, obviously here, where we've got the 4 quadrants at the bottom, which is the immediate actions before, during, after, and then our expectation of recovery time. Our actual action plan for each incident. So when it comes to COVID-19, as we're dealing with right now, or any other incident, what are going to be the steps that we need to take individually from start to finish? Who are we going to communicate with? What operational steps and parameters will we need to go through? What are going to be the individual parts, operations? So where we look at businesses, there's only 3 bits or pieces to each business. There's people, process, tools. In other words, the individuals that do jobs, processes, the way things are done, and tools, the actual tools or items that we use to get through business on a day-to-day basis. So inside of our action plan and incident, we would be itemizing all of the steps that we would need to take as we go through the incidents themselves. And then which partners am I going to need? So if I am dealing with a financial component of a crisis, I would have action plans and steps. Dealing with a financial component, looking at how much revenue or how much money and cash flow I have right now, how long that cash flow or money would be lasting, where that money is going to be, what do I have in the form of reserves, and then in the instance of some clients that I'm dealing with, for example, they're going through rounds of financing just to be able to bolster themselves and to hold their business up long enough or strong enough to be able to weather what's going on economically. So each one of the steps that we've got inside of the action plan itself for the business and what we want the business to be able to do. Are there any partners that we need internally or externally that we will need to use to help? If one of your action plan or steps using COVID-19 as an example would include going through a round of financing, and for the people joining me from down in the US, I'm putting together a resource list right away as well for the American marketplace, as well as the individual states, for if and where potential financial partners, financing rounds, relief that comes. In Canada, for example, we've had several announcements from the federal government saying that there's certain relief for business owners as well as employees. There's certain abatements, tax credits. There are certain one-time amounts that are available. There's an entity called the Business Development Bank of Canada that has rounds of financing available for businesses in crises. So there are similar resources available in the US. I'll be looking to put together that resource list as well. And for everybody on this call, I'll be looking to update everybody through the end of the week with some of those resources too, so you can be able to implement some of those actions. So where we're dealing with COVID-19, what are our actual action steps that we need to deal with right now? So an action plan for me, as an example, would be, first of all, communicating with all of my clients, communicating with all outside partners, being able to move all of my clients to digital meetings as opposed to in some instances where I actually meet face-to-face with clients. What are going to be the tools that I'm going to need so that I can hold those meetings? What's going to be the method that we communicate with? If I get ill as well, what partners are going to be able to step in so that they can maintain my business operations and continue to care for my clients? So we consider this planning page your laundry list, your dump, first of all, for all the steps, and then to be able to organize it in repeated steps. So if you've got standard operating procedures in your business or standard steps that your business would take regularly, then this is where some of that would be itemized as well. See standard operating procedure this. See sales process. See marketing process. See human resources, etc. The action planning segment, apologies for that, when it comes to our business itself, can be a small list or can be enormous. It's going to depend on how complex the operations of our business are. So for us, we need to look at, once again, when we're in the middle of an incident, what does our business have to do to first to sustain itself, to protect what it's built, and what steps and what partners are we going to need so that we can continue to operate effectively. Thoughts, comments, questions? Okay.
We're good.
Okay. So where we come back here to type of disaster and interruption, once again, looking at the individual type itself. Right now we're dealing with a disease. We're dealing with a high severity of disruption. Do we currently have an action plan, which is what page 2 for the actual type of disaster is for? Do we have any safety plans that need to be implemented? Yes, no. What are they and where would they be? Do we have any human needs? And whether there's any human capital needs that we need to satisfy? Are we in need of financial backup or a financial partner to be able to help satisfy what the business does and has? Are we moving to alternate work sites? Most of us are working at home from our home-based offices. In the instance of other types of disruptions, would we need muster points? How are we going to communicate key information to people and stakeholders? What are the actions that we should have, could have, or will need to take in future instances before? What is going to happen during an individual incident? What are going to be our steps and our follow-up after everything happens? And then, of course, what are our expectation for recovery time? And then the individual action plan itself while we're dealing during the incident, which is where we have quite a bit more. Recommendations for action plans, incidents, or ideas can include visual representations, think mind maps, flow charts, etc. Can be step, process, or information driven. In other words, step 1, step 2, step 3. Or can be more organic. I was about to say ornamental, more organic in nature, being that business needs to maintain its sales process, its marketing process, and its key operations in the form of supplies. From there, everything else can sit and parked. And then what partners do I need? Internally, I have a staff member in charge of sales. I have a staff member in charge of marketing, and I handle all operations or materials. So which partners, who's responsible for what? Who is responsible for what? Once more, the action planning is a visual representation to convey to people, including ourselves, but outside of ourselves, what a business needs to do while it's dealing with interruptions, or while it's dealing with slowdowns or changes in its regular operating procedures, and who needs to do what. The entire document, taken into account overall, once more, can be smaller or larger depending on the business need and the marketplace that it's sitting in, and yet takes our business from start to finish. In other words, where is our business sit currently to this day? So if we come back to the very beginning of the document itself, wake up, where we go through the actual continuity plan overview, satisfying who, what, when in the business. Who's going to be responsible? What are going to be the actual disaster types, responses, and our action plans? When things need to happen, key information. Our snapshot for the business itself, where we sit financially, where we sit for policy and procedure, what legislation, legal side that we need to understand, who are all of our emergency contacts, where do our finances, accounting, et cetera, come in, who makes decisions, both operating and fiduciary, in other words, the overall health and long-term executive function of the business. Our actual planning team, the individuals itself, so people in a hurry can find all of the key connections that we need to work through with the business itself. And again, as many or as little as are necessary. Do not miss or overstate or understate information. Understand that a business preparedness or emergency planning is not one size fits all. Some businesses can have fairly organic or fairly small operating or planning or continuation or contingency planning. Some documents can be massive in size, hundreds of pages, depending on complexity in the business. It pays to make what makes sense for your business. In my case, if I look at my organizational chart, if I look at the key stakeholders that will be involved in my business, and I look at where all of the information sits for my business right now, there's surprisingly very little information, or very little information that needs to be conveyed or shared with other people. Who makes fiduciary responsibilities? It is either myself, one of my partners, or my spouse. Operating responsibilities would either be myself or any of the people that I would entrust to help with client care. Finances, where is all the money? Accounting and bookkeeping. Who are my exterior partners that handle all of this, as opposed to having an internal partner? Emergency contact information would be myself, my own coach, my partners in other organizations, my wife, my accountant, my financial planner, etc. Any government legislation or legal information that would need to be involved. What is my standard operating procedure? In other words, what is the model that I use for helping to instruct and carry on with my clients? How do I communicate with them? How do I deliver service? This would be the individual contact information for those individuals themselves, of course, and ranked once more based on priority. In other words, if somebody else walked into my business today, who would they need to communicate with? Who would they need to connect with? And how would they get the information that they needed? Once more, draw my organizational chart. What would be the complexity or the simplest way for me to convey the information so people can visualize where and who needs to be communicated with about what? Essential services. In other words, what I sell. Oh, that got big in a hurry. My. Let's shrink. There we go. Get down there. Oh, Mac, what can't you do? Anyway. My services, products, offerings, commodities. What is my current price? What is my costing model like? Where does replenishment come into? In the case of some questions we've had today, if we are either at the mercy of certain vendors or suppliers, or we're looking at disruptions in our current supply chain, where else can we find resources and information, or where can we find supplies so that we continue to satisfy our clients and our customers' needs to the best of our ability during a disruption? What are the essential internal systems or services that our business has to have? How are we prioritizing them? What is going to be the can't stop, won't stop portions of our business? What other portions can we park and set aside? Prioritized based on highest to lowest priority, so that if anybody else had to step in, how would they be able to assist us? And then last but certainly not least, and why we're talking today, being able to understand the actual disruptions themselves. What are going to be the incidents, or in the case of COVID-19, what we are actually facing right now. Have we any planning yet? It's okay for us to say no. Most of these boxes will largely have no's right now, but it is now up to us to start to fill in information to the best of our ability. Okay, what goes into a communication and muster strategy? What does that even mean? Well, call my mother. Need to call my mom and get her involved because she knows where all the skeletons are hidden. Maybe in some businesses, yes. In other businesses, do we have to communicate with partners, etc.? Who gets talked to in what order and fashion? So once more, the complexity for the action planning that we're doing is dependent on our business, on our industry, and on the needs for our business to continue. Some of these segments and sections will be 3 lines of text in a tiny box on a page. Others will be immense or enormous in size because there are simply so many steps or so many parties involved that we need to be very clear and concise. If we are effective at doing our best job planning this, make no mistake, 2 things will happen. 1, we will not get through COVID-19 outbreak any faster. We just will not. But 2, we will be better prepared to continue to deal with it now. And then our business will be set up to deal with any other disruptions that come in the form in the future. We are learning to do something in many respects that we have never had to think about, or perhaps even bothered to think about, except for some of the, let's say, technical partners that are on here. I know that we've got a safety partner on the call right now. We've got myself. We've got some technical partners. Maybe this would be part of our conversation that we would have looked at in the past. Yes, Adobe, I understand that you want to update right now. Don't try and interrupt. We are responsible for the health and welfare of our business. And this is planning to deal with the situation that we're at right now, but also to build a plan for dealing with things in the future. There are no perfect answers and there are no perfect documents, but everything we do about planning and implementation, if you talk to, let's say, a human resources partner or a safety partner, more often than not, our planning comes in the way of mitigating risk, reducing damage that comes into the business, or being able to more readily deal with or adapt to situations the next time around. Also, when we identify where we have shortcomings in our own planning and implementation as it stands right now, the quicker we become at being able to itemize them and then to deal with them, in other words, to eliminate them, make them go away, so those instances can't hurt our business. A common phrase in my business, in my industry, is you don't know what can hurt you until after it's done damage. Some of you guys are going, Mitch, I've never heard you say that. It's language that I use internally with an awful lot of my other partners or with other coaches. Most people don't know what they don't know until it's hurt them. Right now, we need to look at where our businesses stand in the marketplace as they are right now. We need to look at those items, pieces of information, or plans that we have and more importantly don't have. And we need to start planning effectively. 2 hours on this call, or an hour and 45 minutes as the clock stands right now, is going to give you a start and a foundation to work from. This is by no means complete. There may be many, many hours more planning, or by the end of this call, you may have largely done most of the work your business would need. I implore you to continue to reach out after you're done with this, whether it's amongst the individuals that hopefully you've had a chance to meet and perhaps communicate with off of this call alone, inside your own business communities, or with myself after, and continue to ask questions. There are partners that can help to answer some of these. There are businesses whose primary role and responsibility is to answer some of these sections, like safety, for example, or human resources. Or there is access to resources thanks to the World Wide Web, in other words, Mother Google, that can help us to get answers to a few things that we may not already know about our business. Planning and implementation is about preparedness. It is about ensuring that we have the steps in place to deal with instances that we are dealing with or incidents that we are in now or may happen in the future. And in the case of something like COVID-19, we gain two primary pieces of information. One, being able to plan now as we're dealing with, because chances are we're looking at many of the inconsistencies or information that we're missing currently, and so we can address it or at least know what we're missing. And secondly, in the case of this call, it is a shared experience, meaning that every one of us on this call, regardless of location in the world, industry, business type, whether we sell something or whether we sell a service, that we are all experiencing very similar or the same circumstances as everybody else. If we work together collectively, then what we are experiencing right now will lessen. If we are diligent with our planning and taking direct action with what our business is doing, the repetition of that behavior and our action plans coming out of a document like this help to reduce the impact that outside instances have. To go back to the very beginning of the call, there is no way for us to eliminate the threat or risk that our business is facing right now, or from any instance or incident in the future. Our job is to plan effectively to deal with situations as they come up, to move our business and ourselves into an area where we suffer the least amount of disruption, and where our ability to move our business more quickly to a place of, first of all, stability, and then being able to operate more effectively or to return to operations as fast as possible, is what really comes out of business continuity or emergency preparedness. Our ability to anticipate problems starts to become higher because we have taken the opportunity to plan ahead of time for future incidents. and then our action plans in the form of, and I'll back up to this page as well for a moment. Immediate actions to take before incidents means that we are being mindful as we see symptoms that are similar to other instances that we have faced in the past. When we have a set of expectations and we know whether fire, flood, business, economic, illness, terrorism act, etc., that can cause disruptions in business, we tend to see the same symptoms time and again. And it means that now we have taken direct steps for what does my business and what do I need to do next? How do I prepare internally? And how do I get the help, assistance, or information from my outside partners or vendors so that I can continue my business to the best of its ability and mitigate the disruption or the damage that is going to come because of what's happening, not in spite of or to remove it entirely. Our job as business owners is, I'm going to use a different word than you would expect out of me on this call when it comes to business planning and continuity planning. It is sacred. Our ability to adapt and, more importantly, to move with what is happening to us in the marketplace, in other words, agility and flexibility, are far more important than the ability to withstand. For anybody with a background in martial arts, it's important to be able to get punched, but it's often more important to know with what to do when it happens to you than it is to be able to know exactly how hard you can get hit. It's our adaptability and our ability to spring back up and our ability to move and think logically and clearly that becomes far better at survival than it does our ability to be able to actively get hit or hurt. Your business needs flexibility, it needs resilience, and it needs bounce back. And in many instances, we have not planned for it or had an opportunity or heck, even had the need to look at something that's disruptive as what we have in our marketplace right now. I implore you to take some time and opportunity while we are all suffering from a reduction in business to look at your own business continuity, to answer some of the questions and boxes here. And for those that you do not have a ready answer for, do not hesitate to reach out. And myself or other resources that you may have in your life, if you're fortunate enough to have access to other business capital as well, can help you to plan and fill this in for your own business. If it takes you minutes or hours, I applaud you for having a more simple design for your business that makes it easier to understand where you sit right now and to plan effectively. If it takes days or weeks, I implore you to find resources that are going to help you to shorten that process in time, because the disruption value of what's going on inside of COVID right now is not going away very soon, but our ability to adapt to what's happening in the marketplace, and in other words, make decisions that will keep our business running, needs to happen faster. Because this is not even business winter anymore. For those on the call that understand that term, this is not even business winter anymore. This is nuclear winter, economically. And survivability comes from people that can adapt quicker. So please fill in as much information as possible. Share resources, ideas, and suggestions. Reach out to those people that can help to fill in blanks for areas that are still fuzzy or misunderstood. Because collectively, from an economic standpoint, and then individually from our actual businesses, once more, our ability to flex, bounce back, and to plan even during a crisis, or to plan what our next steps needs to be, must begin now. And I will say that while I do have contingency plans in place, there isn't a single contingency plan I have that it was ready to adapt to the scope and severity of what we have right now in our marketplace. So it is up to us to first of all address where we're at through information to remove fear and uncertainty so that we have clarity on what our next steps are. And if we don't have it, to find resources or information to extend on top of what this call is so that we can better answer what we should do next. And when it comes to the financial, or the fiscal health of our businesses, and this is important for emergency preparedness, and it has not been clearly defined in this document, but needs to be understood when it comes to the financial segment when we have our business snapshot. How much do we have right now, and how long will it last compared to how much we think we're going to go through? That will tell us next what we need to plan effectively to deal with, where and how we're going to find resources to be able to help our business, and past that, to help us find the decisions and do what we need to do next when it comes to what we're facing right now. Ladies and gentlemen, thoughts, questions, or comments?
I'm going to go print this thing right now and start filling it out with my team.
You got her, brother. You got her. Anybody else? So, if you have not been able to communicate with me up until now, but you're coming and meeting me for the very first time, do not hesitate to message me at the bottom. Do not hesitate to email me after. I will be happy to help you fill in any of these segments, questions that, or comments that you have about any of the segments in the document. I will help you to understand which ones apply directly for your business, which you may be able to set aside, because understand, there is not one size fits all for emergency preparedness and planning. If you take a single sheet of paper, depending on the size and complexity of your business, and you move back to the very beginning of the document where it says who, what, and when, and you build 3 columns or 3 segments on a page, who's responsible for making decisions, what decisions or operations need to happen, when they need to be decided, then you will have done a great service for your business. The more complex or larger, the more of this information you're going to need to collect. Ladies and gentlemen, do not hesitate to reach out. I'm here to be of service to you while we are in this collectively. And amongst everybody that was on this call, understand that our ability to work together to support each other is what's going to ultimately lead to success, and more importantly, adaptability and our ability to still be standing at the end of all of this. Please let me know how I can support, reach out to each other, find other resources. Do not be afraid to share those amongst each other, because many hands make light work. And if you want a constant stream of resources, please come and join me on Facebook at cyndicate.org. And you will find access to many of these resources and different courses that are coming up for business owners as well, around marketing, human resources, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, bless you all. Take good care. Continue to ask for help and support out of each other. And otherwise, let's get after it. And I know I'll see all of you later on in the future.
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks very much. And everyone out there, stay positive.
I am my brother's keeper.
I am my brother's keeper. You got that right. All right, let's get after it. Conquer the world, people, and let me know how I can help. Talk to you soon.
Thanks again, Mitch, and happy hunting.
You got her.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.